Hello and welcome to Monster of the Week. Have you ever wondered who built the Giants Church? And no, I don't mean a temple dedicated to D&D's giant pantheon, I mean the Giants Church in Castelli, Finland. Today, it's not much more than a large pile of rocks that suggests walls and doors, but 5,000 years ago, it was a structure of some sort. And it isn't the only one. There are several giant churches dotted across Ostrobothnia, and nobody knows who built them or why. As their name might suggest, there are plenty of legends and myths about these places once being home to giants, but as with many mysterious archaeological finds, there's just no way to know for sure. But that certainly doesn't stop us from speculating, and this is something we have in common with our chosen monster this week. The Orium Dragon is a metallic dragon whose body is covered in metallic scales that glisten with a red and orange hue, and whose eyes burn with intense yellow light that only serves to make their serious cat-like faces all the more intense. As metallic dragons, in direct contrast to their chromatic counterparts, they of course fall on the side of good, but what good is to an Orium Dragon isn't always immediately obvious. This is primarily because the Orium Dragon is a 4th edition exclusive, meaning that they only ever saw print in 4th edition D&D, which depending on how you feel about 4e could be very good or very bad. The reason this makes their motivations murky is because in 4th edition, there was no hard delineation between good and evil when it came to the metallic and chromatic dragons. In fact, some metallic dragons were considered evil and some chromatics were considered good, almost as if to purposefully shake up the status quo. 4e really was the episode 8 of all D&D editions.
Salt.
Many of these dragons, including the Orium Dragon, were just straight up unaligned, which might be fine for 4th edition, but the classification of dragonkind as good or evil based on being either metallic or chromatic is something that would return in the form of 5th edition, which puts the Orium boys here in a tough spot. See, with creatures like the Adamantine Dragon, for example, while their 4e lore might be unreliable, I can read over at least 2 other editions which include them to get a better idea of how they operate. But for the Orium Dragon, 4e is literally the one and only time they would ever see print, so we're kind of left to make a judgment call on that one. By the end of this video, we will have a decision regarding this, but by all means, feel free to let me know why I'm wrong in the comments. Now, aside from being a cool looking reddish-orange metallic dragon, what do these guys even do, you ask? Well, for starters, they're giant nerds. Orium Dragons are entirely obsessed with the past. They have a deep love for fallen civilizations and the stories left behind by peoples who lived during bygone ages. As such, they tend to hang out in dense jungles and other difficult to reach places where long lost ruins may be found as yet undiscovered. They often make their homes in these ruins, and they consider all that they discover, buildings, monuments, fossils, and artifacts alike, to be part of their hoard. But for an Orium Dragon, simply discovering secrets from the past isn't enough. They often seek to restore these fallen civilizations back to former glories. They'll have their minions reconstruct buildings using what little context might remain from the original people who lived there to build back what has been lost to time. And even if it isn't exactly how it was in its heyday, this drive to restore and relive ancient glories is a major motivator for the Orium Dragons who indulge in such things. In the case of an ancient and powerful Orium Dragon, they may even go as far as to secure the means of resurrecting some of the dead who once called this restored ruin their home, literally returning a lost civilization back to life so that they might have a second chance. Now, as with all metallic dragons, they are named after some kind of metal, which begs the question, what even is Orium? As far as I was able to find, Orium is only really mentioned in 4th edition D&D, and it is yet another fantasy metal akin to adamantine or mithril, though instead of being impossibly hard and sought after as the best possible component for crafting weapons and armor, it is an incredibly soft metal, even softer than gold, which makes it poorly suited for armor and equipment. However, it does possess incredibly potent magical properties that focus and heighten the powers of the arcane. So a few Orium studs on a set of leathers might not provide any mundane protection, but it does certainly allow for some powerful magic effects to be placed with ease. The only downside really is that Orium comes from the Feywild originally. making it difficult to find, and it's also incredibly toxic. So you not only need to know how to smith the stuff properly, you also need to know how to purify it, otherwise you're going to end up with a really cool magic item that kills the user slowly with poison. As you can imagine, this translates into our dragon here having some pretty gnarly poison and acidic capabilities, and that Feywild connection, as it turns out, gives the Orium Dragon one of the most unique breath weapons found amongst dragon kind. But before we get into just exactly what this dragon can do, I gotta give a massive shout out to this week's sponsor, the Land of Eam and the Underlands expansion Kickstarter. The Land of Eam is a unique TTRPG system and setting with a focus on being beginner friendly for both kids and adults. It's super easy to learn and places a major focus on creativity, allowing you to go on all sorts of adventures across a simultaneously whimsical and epic world that gives the vibe of Lord of the Rings mixed with Muppets and a dash of adventure time for good measure. For the GMs in the room, the rulebook is packed with tons of quest hooks, characters, creatures, dungeons, and a bunch of tools designed to make the game incredibly simple and fun for you to run. If you've never had a chance to play in this world, the Underlands expansion Kickstarter is the perfect time to pick up either the base game or the base game along with this new expansion. And if you're already a Land of Eam enjoyer, then I have amazing news for you, because there is a bunch of new content on the way. The Underlands expansion is a fully fleshed out sandbox in the fantastical subterranean world below the Mucklands, stretching from the bustling homeland of the goblins to the fiery core of the world. The Underlands is divided into 4 major zones, each filled with unique dangers, hidden marvels, and untold stories. At least for now. So if you're looking for a game to introduce some new players to the world of TTRPGs, something that's a lot more kid-friendly than the crunch us grognards might be used to, or simply a fast and fun change of pace for your game night with a whimsical bend, follow the link in the description down below and check out the Land of Eam and the Underlands expansion for yourself and see what you think. Once again, thank you so much to the Land of Eam Kickstarter for bringing us here today to talk about dragons. Speaking of which, let's get back to it and see how our draconic pal is doing. The Orium Dragon, like all dragons, is a dragon, meaning it can do all the dragon stuff we know and love and fear, but it also has a very few interesting tricks up its sleeve which make for something a little more unique than your average worm. Having scales made from a metal that is essentially just an extra toxic magic lead, they are not only immune to poison and acid damage, but they also deal an unhealthy amount of acid damage with all of their attacks. They also have an absolutely brutal breath weapon that does something I promise you've never seen a dragon do before. It starts by simply blasting a cone of caustic vapor that does a split amount of both poison and acid damage, which, while interesting, is nothing incredibly innovative. But once the damage is done, the acidic fog doesn't simply just drift away. It instead coalesces into the shape of a dragon, mimicking the creature that just exhaled it. The breath becomes a creature known as a vaporous spirit, which is directly under the dragon's control and immediately rolls into the initiative order after the dragon. It's not an insanely powerful stat block, it more or less just takes 1 attack, which is the same as the dragon's rend attack, but the dragon's breath weapon coming back to life and making an extra attack is something many people will not be expecting to happen. Now the vaporous spirit doesn't have a ton of hit points either. At its absolute maximum, assuming it was created by an ancient Orium dragon, it's only got 40 HP, and at the wormling stage it's only got 10. But assuming the dragon's breath weapon recharges, it can make more of these things and gradually build up some misty minions over the course of the fight. But if, say, you decide you don't like the idea of the dragon slowly building up its forces, and you decide to destroy the vaporous spirit, you super can do that. But upon its destruction, the dragon's breath weapon is automatically recharged if it wasn't already. So it falls to the dragon's enemies to decide. Would you rather deal with a torrent of acid and poison, or would you prefer to have a slowly increasing army of vapor boys coming to get you? If you're preparing this encounter for a group on the DM side, and you feel like the dragon needs a little more backup, there's also nothing stopping you from saying the dragon had a few of these minions prepared ahead of time and throwing a few vaporous spirits into the mix at the beginning of the fight. The spirits can also communicate with the dragon via telepathy for up to a mile as well, so the dragon using these creatures as scouts around its lair makes total sense to me. But speaking of the dragon's lair, let's talk a little bit about how you might actually use this creature and the places it inhabits within a story of your own creation. So there's a lot to talk about here. For starters, as all dragons in the 2024 rules and in every version of the game before 5th edition, this bad boy has a few spells it can cast to help it out in combat, but it's also got access to one of my favorite spells, Legend Lore. I went on about Legend Lore in one of my videos where I talked about the new Cyclops Seer back in January, but a truncated version of that little rant basically boils down to the fact that Legend Lore can be a great tool for any DM to give the players information about something. If you want to just give out a lore dump on a specific topic, Legend Lore can be a good way to do that. And if you want to keep it cryptic and mysterious, Legend Lore allows you to keep the sense of wonder attached to any information you're giving the players. For those of you who don't know already, Legend Lore is basically if Wikipedia was a spell. It lets you inquire about a specific topic, and then the spell tells you more or less any information that is widely known about said topic, but the information is likely to be incomplete or delivered in a cryptic fashion if the information you're seeking is more obscure and not known by that many folks. It feels like a perfect spell for this dragon to have, seeing as they're all about digging into the past, and access to the spell as an adult and as an ancient dragon along with their expertise in history makes them a potential wealth of long-lost knowledge. Having an Orium Dragon fulfill that role of prophetic hermit or old wise man said to occupy a distant locale is a perfect fit in my opinion. But assuming you want to use one of these dragons in a less powerful way, one of the smaller stat blocks such as the young or wormling stage dragon, perhaps the creature wants to venture out into a forbidden or terribly dangerous ruin that is said to house all manner of ancient secrets. But it's dangerous even for a creature like a dragon. Now that could be a really good opportunity for the party to make some money. They could be hired by the dragon, or maybe actively working with the creature towards the same ends of excavating the ruin in search of something. Or perhaps the party is looking for this long lost something, and an Orium Dragon has already taken up residence in the ruin. They would have to either convince that dragon to allow them access into its lair, sneak in undetected, or confront the creature head on, none of which will be particularly easy. You could also have an Orium Dragon act as the catalyst to a greater campaign plotline. Perhaps the dragon delved too deep and too greedily into the ancient ruin, only to accidentally unleash a powerful demon, disturb a long dormant mind flayer colony, or even become possessed by a powerful malign spirit who is sealed away in the ruin's deepest chambers. And now, of course, it falls to our brave heroes to step into whatever situation has been created and destroy the evil which was unknowingly unleashed by the dragon, and hopefully teach the guy about proper etiquette when dungeon delving. If you see a mysterious chain door sealed with chains and archaic runes, just don't open it. You can just walk away. That's none of your business. Another fun little tidbit in the dragon's lore we haven't yet talked about is the Feywild connection. Nobody really knows for sure how or if these dragons are from the Feywild originally, but seeing as the Feywild is the only place Orium can be naturally found, there's definitely some kind of relationship there. In fact, some Orium dragons are said to feel much more at ease in the Feywild and will attempt to actually move their ruinous layers from the material plane into the Feywild, which can be very confusing for creatures venturing in the Fey, only to stumble upon the long-lost ruins of an ancient empire said to be on the material plane. In such cases, however, an investigation can be lethal if you're not careful, for you are most likely in the lair of a powerful Orium Dragon, which unless invited, is not a great place to be. See, when an Orium Dragon first meets practically any other creature, unlike most dragons who love to approach the situation with lots of bluster and grandeur, these dragons simply begin by approaching and calmly asking a series of very direct questions. They do this because they are trying to determine which category you might fit into. The three categories being potential allies, thieves, or food. If they determine you're in the latter two categories, you're very likely going to get eaten by a dragon. It just is what it is. If the former, though, then the dragon is liable to make a display of power in an attempt to impress before determining how you might best serve it as an ally. They're not particularly unkind or cruel, but like most dragons, they have an acute understanding of their place in the food chain, and as such, more or less expect subordination from less capable creatures unless they prove themselves to be worthy of some other consideration. In most cases, they are quite reasonable and understanding, though unwilling to suffer fools and liars, especially in the case of their biggest rival, black dragons. Black dragons are the antithesis of everything Orium dragons stand for. They pillage and destroy cultures and civilizations civilizations with the express goal of bringing them to ruin and lording over what remains, often hoarding trophies in the form of monuments and prized artifacts belonging to the peoples they have annihilated. This is something an Orium Dragon simply will not abide. So when it comes to black dragons, unless severely outmatched, it's on sight. They have the slightest bit of advantage over black dragons as they are immune to both acid and poison damage, while black dragons are only immune to acid, so their breath weapon still manages to do something to their rivals. But black dragons also often command many undead minions, so take from that what you will. Though an adventuring party getting caught up in the rivalry between two draconic forces could make for a really great campaign. I mean, just do Indiana Jones, except the Nazis are all undead led by an evil dragon, and Indy is a young Orium Dragon with a cool whip. Another kind of fun interaction here might be between the Orium Dragons and a fey creature called Ruin Chanters. I made a video about these guys a while back, but essentially they are fey beings who live in long lost ruins and seek to preserve them as such. They also have the ability to summon ruin elementals, which are creatures literally comprised of the ruins themselves, so using them as either minions of an Orium Dragon or potential enemies if they're at odds about how to properly restore and respect the ruins they occupy could be really cool. And as fey creatures, it also strengthens the idea of that connection Orium Dragons have with the Feywild, so it all just clicks together seamlessly, even if the ruins are in the Feywild themselves. And if nothing else, you could always use the ruin elementals independent of their fey creators as minions for the dragon, because that just seems cool. But where does all of this leave our dragon in terms of the question of alignment? I am fully in the camp of not taking alignment super seriously. Ultimately, it's an archaic game statistic that doesn't have a whole lot to do with how the game is played these days, there being virtually no mechanics save for a few magic items that really interact with it at all. But I do think as a quick baseline vibe check when you first look at a creature's stat block, it is somewhat useful and therefore worthy of consideration at the very least. Personally, I see these dragons as being neutral good. They don't really go out of their way to be particularly lawful or chaotic, and they generally want to just do their stuff without harming others, sometimes actively helping, which feels like a good motivation to me, but let me know what you think. Maybe in your world they are much more aggressive and have become the first villainous metallic dragons to break rank from the others. The last thing I want to touch on, however, is the use of Orium magic items. The secret of smithing Orium has long been on the material plane, though the methods by which to purify it are still relatively unknown beyond those that forge it in the Feywild. So seeking out that secret on behalf of a blacksmith could be a fun reason for the party to venture into the Feywild. And who knows, maybe they encounter a dragon along the way. But beyond that, this also means that in-world there are many magic items created by blacksmiths who didn't know what they were really doing, and ended up creating powerful magic items that were toxic to anyone who would seek to wield them. Now, if you happen to be someone who is unaffected by poison, that's not really a problem. And while I can think of a few creatures who fall into that category, I mean, approximately 30% of the monster manual, the most likely candidates for using these items are, of course, the undead. Got a cool magic sword that does a bunch of cool magic stuff, but it also releases a 5-foot aura of what is essentially chlorine gas? Not only is that not gonna be a problem if you're a Death Knight or a Lich, it also means if any living creatures, gross, happen to get up close and personal, they will also be poisoned by your cool magic weapon. It's a win-win scenario. But from the adventurer side of things, maybe finding an impure Orium magic item could be made usable by the party if they just keep it in a bag of holding or whatever, and then bring it into the Feywild to be purified and therefore useful by a blacksmith. But in any case, I love these guys, and I hope you do too. It's always fun to find a new dragon who has something to offer beyond the standard kit of bites and claws, especially when that dragon makes the world feel just that much more alive. And as always, if you do want to use this monster, you can find all the stats, lore, and information for 5e D&D in the description down below, 100% for free. I'll also be sure to leave a link down there to the Ruin Chanter video and the stats for all that, so if you want to check those out, you can. And if you are one of my lovely patrons, first of all, thank you. This doesn't happen without your support. And as thanks, on the Patreon page, you can of course find the high-res PDF for this monster, which is all the same information as the free version, but with the updated art and formatting, and it looks all cool and special. Speaking of, it's time for Patron of the Week. Thank you so much to Artemis. On the hunt for more cool monsters, I couldn't ask for a better companion. and thank you for watching. As always, if there's a monster from an older edition of D&D, another role-playing game, your brain, or whatever that you would like to see converted into 5th edition and talked about on this show, let me know in the comments below. Let me know in the Dungeon Dad Discord, which is also linked down below, and it will be added to the creature suggestions list. And who knows? You might just see it on a future episode of Monster of the Week. Also, I can't believe it's summertime already. Gen Con is upon us in like 6 weeks or whatever. I'm gonna be there. If you're going to Gen Con, maybe I'll see you there. I'm gonna be in some events and be running some games and doing all kinds of stuff. I will be sure to update you guys as we get closer to the date here. But for now, I'll leave a link to my current schedule in the description down there as well. So if you wanna come to any of the events that I'm gonna be present at, or just come say hi, which would be cool, then I'd love to see you there. Anyways, that's all I got for you this week. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.